Ayrton and Charlotte, thanks for joining us this week on the Carolina Weather Group. Saturday marked the beginning of hurricane season, which every year begins June 1st, and this year has us gearing up for an above average tropical season. So we're going to prepare for the season ahead by looking back at some of our favorite hurricane themed interviews right here from the
We are headed to Charlotte, North Carolina today to take part in the Hurricane Awareness Tour. Evan?
Yep.
Hurricane Hunter is going to be there along with several meteorologists from the National Hurricane Center. All right, we're here at the Hurricane Awareness Tour, and we're with National Hurricane Center Director Ken Graham. Last year, North Carolina experienced Alberto. We had Florence, even some touches of Michael with heavy rain. So as you guys just finished your review of those events, tell us about some of maybe the crazy stats that you saw come out of Florence with the heavy rain threat.
Yeah, it's interesting when you look at it because the actual track forecast was pretty much right on track. We did a great job with the track. The intensity forecast is still tough. I mean, we're underdoing it at the beginning, and then we overshot the intensity forecast towards the end. So we still struggle with this whole intensity problem. But here's the deal. Despite the intensity, the impacts were the same. Even with the winds coming down, the impacts didn't change at all. Storm surge. Think about this, 100 miles inland, we have the highest values of the storm surge. I mean, that's something that we talk about. It's not just a coastal threat, it's inland. And that was predicted 4 days ahead of time. The rainfall forecast, almost perfect 5 days ahead of time. So what's happening here? We got good forecasts, but we still have people in the water. So I think there's this other component that we have to talk about, and it's behavioral and social science, getting that information into the forecast as well, and so we can communicate the best we can to get a good response.
Not only did it bring along the rain, but it also brought gusty winds. In fact, there was a lot of wind in lots of places that don't experience hurricane winds. We caught up with Eric Thomas earlier this summer at the National Hurricane Awareness Tour. Eric reflects back on what he remembers as Hugo was bearing down on Charlotte, North Carolina.
You know, I got here in the fall of '88, and in November of '88, they had that F4 tornado up in Raleigh, and next thing I know, I'd barely got my feet on the ground, and I'm in a helicopter flying over this tornado damage and thinking, oh my goodness, what have I gotten myself into? So I got through that, and then '89 rolled around, and here comes Hurricane Hugo. And I have to tell you, we were woefully under-equipped back then in the weather department. We actually, when I got here, I was the first meteorologist to ever work at WBTV. So at the same time that I got there, they were feverishly trying to bring in the weather equipment that would allow me to really do my job as a meteorologist. So at that point, we really didn't have any real analytical equipment. So I was a slave to just this little sheet of 1 page of surface weather maps from AccuWeather to kind of like look at this and go, oh, gee, there's a cold front, there's a warm front, and that looks like a hurricane, you know. And so, I mean, we had the little 300 baud weather ticker back then, you know, tick, 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 you know, bringing up the data. And so, but to their credit, you know, AccuWeather, as this storm was getting closer, you know, was letting us know, look, this thing has got a very fast forward speed. It was like coming into the coast at around 35, 40 miles per hour. And the problem with that is you got a Category 4 hurricane down there, and this thing is going to be up in Charlotte, you know, within 4, 5, 6 hours. That's not much time for a Cat 4 to spin down, is it?
Right.
And so we were warning people, look, this is going to be different than most of the coastal hurricanes in the past. And we were feverishly trying to tell people to tie everything down, get ready, this is not going to be good. Even with that, though, we had no idea that it was going to create the amount of destruction that it did. I remember when the first light came up, and I was there all night, and we looked out the windows out of the radio station that we have there, and my jaw just dropped because it seemed like there must have been 95, 100 pine trees that were just mowed down. It looked like Godzilla had come through. I mean, it was unbelievable. And then, of course, the rest is history. You know, we've always heard about how people were without power for 3 weeks. You hear the sounds of chainsaws buzzing in the air, you know, week after week. I remember when I was trying to get home that day, and it took me a long time to get home because of all the blocked roads, that, you know, the very first intersection that I came to, right at the bottom of our hill, there was a National Guardsman there with his M16 machine gun, you know, in the intersection. And that's when it really hit me. I thought, it feels like I am in a war zone here. And that's what it was, with just the complete destruction of the infrastructure around Charlotte, and all the trees down, the roads blocked, stores closed, nobody could get gas, and it was just really intimidating, to be a part of that as a citizen. And then after that, of course, all the cleanup and the recovery began.
Very unique story from Eric Thomas. We also caught up with Larry Sprinkle at the Charlotte Douglas International Airport for the hurricane awareness story. And Larry tells us about what it was like covering Hugo while on the air, broadcasting to the many folks watching as Hugo bared down on Western North Carolina.
And obviously, this is going to my 35th year. I've seen and covered quite a few, but that one specifically impacted me directly because the morning that actually hit Charlotte, at the station we had a limited staff. We had two of us in the weather department, Steve Raleigh and myself, and just a nucleus of people to run the station. So there were, maybe 12 people at the most in the station. So they decided to lock a camera down in the studio. So the meteorologist is on air with a lockdown camera. Steve was taking a break, and I think it was maybe 4:20-ish in the morning. We'd been outside, inside. We knew that the front of the storm was hitting. And I'll never forget, the camera was like here in front of me. And off to my left is the main part of the studio. And so I'm talking, and I'm saying, we've had reports of wind gusts over 90 miles an hour near Shaw Air Force Base, winds over 70 miles an hour in Charlotte. And about that time, I could hear something off to my left, kind of a creaking sound. And then all of a sudden, I looked over, and about 500 pounds of ceiling came in right next to me. So the camera didn't pick it up, but I'm like this. The camera is here, but my eyes are like this. And part of the ceiling just caved in front of me.
We've received gusts up to about 100 miles an hour at Shaw Air Force Base. I've been distracted because, as a lot of people are experiencing, part of our ceiling just collapsed in here. This is a very serious system.
Back to you guys in the newsroom. So it went back to our news anchor at the time, Rick Jackson. And so Rick goes, his camera's back on him. He goes, Larry, let me ask you a question. Larry was on his hands and knees, crawling. Took me 2 seconds to get out of the studio. But yeah, what happened was we had a big tower next to the building, a 1,200-foot tower. The guy wires that came down one snap, and about 1,000 pounds of it hit the roof. And so that pushed the ceiling into the studio. So I thought I was going to be the first weather guy to go in the act. But luckily I got that. But yeah, that's you can't forget that.
Absolutely, and obviously that hurricane was intense, but not just on the shore, but also inland. Places like Charlotte. For our viewers that don't know, why exactly was it that those strong winds made it so far into the planet?
I mean, I think that atmospherically, you had everything in place it took. You had obviously a hurricane, Category 4 hurricane off the coast of Charleston. You had a big area of high pressure off the coast of New England, area of low pressure in the Gulf of Mexico. Those steered that storm right across Charleston, right into the Midlands of South Carolina, making that turn more to the north, right over Charlotte, then right over Hickory, and then just on a beeline up the Ohio Valley. I mean, it was atmospherically things that you just don't see that often.
So that was a very unique story from Larry Sprinkle, and one that I can only imagine covering Hugo as you have partial roof collapse of the studio. That just very unique story. James, you live in Charlotte, the city of trees, and I'm sure the devastation was real.
Yeah, and I wasn't living here at the time, Scotty, but that's my understanding of it, having listening to Eric, talking to Larry, not only at the airport, but at work each day, just talking about the impact that this storm had and the cleanup that followed. I'm still thinking about that image you had earlier in the show, Scotty, about the WSOC TV tower that just looked like it was bent over by a monster force. And I think that's evident of the impact that this storm had on not only metal, but trees across the whole region.
So this is the mighty P-3 Orion. It's a uniquely instrumented aircraft for hurricane research and reconnaissance. It's a Navy Well, it comes from the Navy P3, which we have taken from the manufacturer and uniquely instrumented for the research that we do. Some of the unique features of our plane are our lower fuselage radar, which is a multi-mode radar that can actually lower in flight and scan 360 degrees around the plane as we're flying along. And that data can then go directly to the National Hurricane Center for use in their research models. In addition to that, on the tail, we have the tail Doppler radar, which is a unique radar that actually scans vertically 360 degrees and takes a slice of the storm as we're flying through both before and after the plane. So by taking 2 scans, it actually allows us to do a 3-dimensional view of that storm as we're flying through it and measure those updrafts and downdrafts of the storm and measure those dynamics, which goes towards predicting the strengthening or weakening of that storm.
That's awesome, man. How many of these do you guys have in your fleet?
We have 2 P3s. This one's Kermit the Frog, and his partner, Miss Piggy, is at home getting ready for the hurricane season. So this radar underneath our plane is our multi-mode radar, and that actually can lower in flight. That whole radar dish lowers below the plane to clear it from any interference of the plane, and can scan 360 degrees around as we fly. So it's just like the radar that you might have on your phone or that you might get from the National Weather Service. And it's a X-band radar, which is a highly detailed radar for close range measurements. So with that, we've actually just incorporated that into the plane within the last couple of years. And as we're flying into these storms, what we're seeing is that additional detail that's provided by that new radar is allowing us to see never before seen mesovortices within that eye wall that help explain why certain areas of that storm are more violent than others.
What's one that really stands out to you?
Well, your first mission is always special. So my first mission was Hurricane Cristobal back in 2014. And that one was unique in that it was a small tropical storm that increased to a hurricane. It didn't really impact the United States, but for whatever reason, that storm had more lightning than I've ever seen in my life. So flying through that storm, it was like going through a disco ball with all that lightning going on. The other more unique one that really impacted us was Hurricane Irma. So we flew that storm as it went north of Cuba and went through the Caribbean. And as it was starting to threaten our home in Lakeland, Florida, that one was a strong, beautiful Category 5 storm, but we were flying it straight to our own home. So our forecast was dictating how that prediction was turning either the west coast or east coast of Florida and how it was going to impact our home. So we fly the mission, then go home and prepare ourselves.
And you bring up a good point. And walk us through what it's like in the day of a NOAA pilot. From the time that there's a storm recognition to hey, we may need to deploy on this storm and to the actual launch.
Absolutely. So the National Hurricane Center is constantly monitoring the pressure systems as they go across the Atlantic. And when they identify something that has the potential for development, they'll start tasking us through CARCA, which is one of their partner organizations with the Air Force. So they'll dictate who gets to go where and launch us out into the storm. Oftentimes, we'll pre-deploy out to Barbados or St. Croix in order to get further out into the Atlantic and catch those storms even earlier. Once we do that, we'll typically try to do 24-hour operations, which for one plane, if we have that out there, we'll do 2 crews and launch typically once every 12 hours. Our typical mission flight is about 8 to 10 hours long. So we'll fly out for 8 to 10 hours, land, refuel the plane, get a new crew going, and do it right again.
One last question here. Once you break into that eye wall and you penetrate and you get in there and you see that stadium effect, personally, what is it like for you to see that?
I tell you what, it's quite the contradiction in that stadium effect really only happens in the most severe Category 5 storms. Some of those Category 2, 3, 4 storms, they still have a lot of thunderstorms in the middle. So even as you break through into the eye wall, you may still have to be ducking and diving some of that internal convection. But that Category 5 stadium effect is pretty awesome. You don't get to see that any other time.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely. Thank
you. Yes, sir. Major Dillon, and you're with the 53rd?
Yeah, pilot on the 53rd, the WC-130.
Okay. And how long have you been a pilot?
Been a pilot since the early 2000s. Flew Blackhawks in the Army first.
Right.
And then made a switch to WC-130s about 7 years ago.
What made you want to switch from rotor wing to fixed wing?
Well, the Army is a good place for a while, but that's a young man's game.
Right.
I was hoping to fly C-130s. The Hurricane Hunters were right down the street. They had an opportunity, so I took it. So and it's been never looked back.
Now, when you guys get ready, mission ready, once tropical season comes around, how does your schedule work as far as from the time that you guys may have to go recon a storm to actual launch time?
Yeah, great question. We have an agreement with the National Hurricane Center. We have a 16-hour response time. So basically, you're sitting around the plan of the day, the pod is what they call it, comes in and says, hey, we definitely want y'all to go fly. So depending on where the storm is, we're taking off and going to fly it that very next day, and we'll fly it till the storm dies out. If it's in Hawaii, that obviously takes a couple of more days to get there. So they'll usually give us a couple of days response time. We definitely want you to get out there, and we'll load 3 airplanes, crews, and people and go. But it happens pretty quick. If you've never seen it, new people that'll come in, it looks like mass chaos and doesn't look very organized, but it seems to work. It's just how it is.
Now, your average missions that you fly, I know that's going to be really dependent on where the storm is, but you go out to the Caribbean or something. Walk us through one of those missions.
Yeah,
time-wise.
So a mission, the average mission is about 9 to 10 hours, depending on how far it is away. So we'll just use flying in. Let's use Hurricane Florence that came through last year. We moved to Savannah with 3 aircraft crews, and we were hitting the storm when it was about 6 hours away. So basically 5.5 hours to get there, a couple hours, and then fly back. So those missions were long, 12, 13 hours. So as it moves in, you can stay in a storm environment longer. Hurricane Florence, when it was hitting the coast, I flew it for about 7 hours on my last flight. As it was making landfall, they were concerned about how strong the wind was on the backside, so we continued to fly it all the way.
Right. Now for Florence, were you guys launching from Bermuda or Savannah?
Florence.
Gotta love it.
Yeah. So for Hurricane Florence, we moved to Savannah, so we started flying immediately off of Savannah. We knew, they basically, as soon as we flew it the first time, they made a projection. I think within 10 miles, they knew where it was going to hit. It's pretty accurate.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Now tell for some of the viewers that don't really know a whole lot about airplanes, about your aircraft here.
Yeah, so this is a WC-130J, C-130 coming off the assembly line. We add a few things to it, little pieces of equipment that make it a W. It's a big tank. The J variant is an upgrade. If you can see the props, these props, 6-bladed props. If y'all look at the NOAA plane later, it still has the 4 boat paddle props. Upgraded engines, 4,700 horsepower per engine, a lot of thrust. We can take off 165,000 pounds. If war was going on, the president could waive it to 175,000. So a lot of weight can come off of this aircraft. We normally fly around topped off on gas, close to 60,000 pounds, which give us a max loitering time and a little slop on each side. So we have to be super precise on our flight
Now,
time.
does the Hercules have air-to-air refuel capability?
No, thank God it doesn't, because if our aircraft did, they want us to air-to-air refuel, and we would never land.
I understand that. As far as some of the weather systems that you may have on board.
Yeah, so the biggest thing for us, other than the meteorologists, them being the weather weapon, I'm gonna start calling them a weather weapon, but those guys themselves interpreting the weather and sending it back to the National Hurricane Center. We use a drop sign. Basically, a sign falls from the bottom of the aircraft about 2,500 feet a minute, and as it's falling, it's getting temperature, dew point, wind speeds, big thing. Pressure's the real big thing, and as it falls, it goes all the way to the surface, and it's sending information back. That's our go-to ticket. We have a couple of other instruments. The Smurf. I can lie to you, it's the Smurf. It's the Step Meteor. Yeah, it has a long acronym. It was built in Massachusetts by some really smart guys. But it's actually looking at waves and as they crash, and it's measuring temperature and gives us a wind speed. Really upper level cerebral stuff.
Right. That's